Over time, the global conversation on slavery has primarily centered around the transatlantic trade involving American and European merchants. However, there exists another form of slavery that has received less attention, the Arab-Muslim slave trade. This trade, also known as the Trans-Saharan trade or Eastern slave trade, has remained largely hidden despite its profound impact on Africa, its people, and its history. In this video, we delve into the Trans-Saharan slave trade, a brutal practice lasting over 1,300 years, during which Arabs would raid, capture, and enslave Africans, including fellow Arabs and Muslims, solely because of their black skin. They justified these atrocities using verses from their holy scripture, perpetuating the trade through generations. While exact figures on the number of enslaved Africans vary, scholars estimate that around 9 million Africans were captured and sold through the Trans-Saharan trade. This trade was marked by the most dehumanizing conditions imaginable, from brutal capture and slave markets to grueling labor in foreign lands. Records of slave trading and transportation in the Sahara date back to ancient times, with civilizations like ancient Egypt and the Roman Empire engaging in the practice. Arab and Berber traders expanded the trade during the Middle Ages, venturing into sub-Saharan Africa to meet the demand for slaves in Arab nations and Constantinople. Arab traders would acquire slaves through violent raids or by purchasing them from local rulers, often resorting to deceit and kidnapping, particularly targeting children. The captured slaves would then endure perilous journeys across the Sahara to be sold in markets in North Africa and the Middle East. These markets, located in cities like Morocco, Algiers, Tripoli, and Cairo, facilitated the buying and selling of slaves, who were treated as mere property. The routes taken by slave caravans varied depending on their destination, with some slaves transported by boat down the Nile to Egypt and others traversing Saharan trade routes to North Africa. Notable historical accounts, such as that of the Berber explorer Ibn Battuta, shed light on the scale and brutality of the trans-Saharan slave trade. Battuta documented his travels with trade caravans carrying hundreds of enslaved individuals destined for domestic servitude and concubinage. The legacy of the trans-Saharan slave trade persists today, reminding us of the deep-rooted injustices endured by Africans throughout history. By acknowledging and understanding this dark chapter, we honor the resilience of those who suffered and strive to build a more just and equitable world. If you found this information valuable, please like and subscribe to our channel to stay informed on important historical narratives. Country name and Cameroon, and the east-west route connecting Egypt to Ghana, Mali, and Songhai. Kanem-Bornu, Zawila was another route to North Africa, as the Kanem-Bornu Empire in the eastern part of Nigeria was an active participant in the trans-Saharan slave trade for centuries. This trade formed the foundation of the empire's prosperity. Passage through the Sahara required the expertise of ethnic groups adapted to survival in arid environments, such as the local Berber tribes and foreign Bedouins from Arabia, including the Tuareg and others indigenous to Libya. These nomadic peoples served as guards, guides, and camel drivers along the trans-Saharan trade routes, granted autonomy and treated as allies by North African governments. Oases served as vital way stations for caravans, facilitating both north-south and east-west travel. Despite expert assistance, the passage could prove deadly to merchants and slaves alike. Entire caravans of thousands of people could vanish without a trace. Between AD 650 and 1600, an average of 5,000 Africans were shipped out annually by the Arabs, totaling roughly 7.25 million. From 1600 to 1800, another 1.4 million Africans were shipped out, and the 19th century saw the peak of Arabian trade, with 12,000 Africans shipped out yearly. The total for the 19th century alone was 1.2 million slaves to Arabia, bringing the total close to 9.85 million. Nearly on par with the conservative estimate of 12 million victims of the Atlantic slave trade. However, some African historians dispute these figures, suggesting over 50 million Africans were shipped out during the Atlantic trade alone. Additionally, approximately 4.1 million Africans were shipped across the Red Sea to the Persian Gulf and India, with Muslims largely conducting this trade. Throughout the 19th century, Omani Arab rulers of Zanzibar shipped hundreds of thousands of African slaves to work on clove plantations, perpetuating the exploitation of Africans even after the abolition of the Atlantic slave trade. Arab slavers continued enslaving Africans into the early 20th century, with reports of ongoing slavery in Sudan and Mauritania. The Middle Passage in the Arabian trade was similarly horrific to its Atlantic counterpart, marked by grueling desert marches, thirst, hunger, and brutality inflicted by slavers. These enslaved Africans were often sold to European slavers or used as laborers on Arab plantations abroad. Despite Islamic legal views against capturing Muslims as slaves, African Muslims were not immune to slavery, particularly as the trade expanded. The Trans-Saharan caravan route focused on West Africa, from the Niger Valley to the Gulf of Guinea, leading to markets in the Maghreb and the Nile Basin. This journey could take up to 3 months, with inhumane conditions resulting in an estimated 50% mortality rate among slaves in transit. 19th-century European explorers documented the perilous nature of traveling alongside slave caravans, with reports of numerous deaths due to disease, hunger, and harsh desert conditions. The trans-Saharan slave trade stands as a harrowing chapter in African history, marked by exploitation, suffering, and loss of life. In a single harrowing night in Libya, Bornu suffered the loss of 40 slaves, a British account vividly detailing the discovery of 100 skeletons. Contrary to the common portrayal of African slavery, which often conjures images of male laborers toiling under the relentless lash on distant sugar plantations, the true face of servitude lies in the coerced migration of countless young girls and women across the Sahara and the Horn of Africa into the confines of Islamic concubinage. While the European New World measured a man's worth by the physical exertion he contributed to empire building, the Islamic Orient esteemed wealth and prestige, often manifesting through the subjugation of young girls. Women slaves in the Arab world were frequently relegated to the status of concubines, residing in harems with rare prospects of becoming wives, while their offspring gained freedom. Meanwhile, many male slaves and boys endured the brutal practice of castration, transforming them into eunuchs tasked with overseeing the harems. This procedure, with a mere 10% survival rate, was carried out either before or after purchase, with strictures within Islamic law often necessitating pre-castration before crossing Muslim territories. Despite European slavers favoring male labor, Arab traders saw profit in sexual exploitation and reproductive capabilities. The Arab slave trade, spanning over 13 centuries, inflicted significant demographic damage on sub-Saharan Africa, decimating populations and fostering economic decline. This trade persisted despite Orthodox Muslim jurists' stance against the enslavement of Muslims, highlighting a stark contradiction within Islamic societies. Central Africa bore the brunt of continual raids during the 16th and 17th centuries, feeding the expansive Saharan and Nile River slave routes. Although officially abolished in various regions throughout the 19th century, including Tripoli and Algeria, the practice endured clandestinely in Arab countries well into the 20th century. Even today, traces of slavery persist in some Arab nations, with Malawi criminalizing the practice as late as 2007. The aftermath of the Libyan civil war in 2011 further exacerbated instability, rendering migrants vulnerable to exploitation. Libya, a crucial transit point for African migrants en route to Europe, has seen many fall prey to human traffickers, facing the grim fate of being sold into slavery after detention. The horrors of slavery, whether in historical narratives or contemporary realities, serve as a poignant reminder of humanity's capacity for cruelty and the enduring struggle for freedom and dignity. In the regions south of Libya, smugglers and militia groups targeted African countries for slave trading, transporting victims to Libyan markets. Migrants with specialized skills such as painting and tiling commanded higher prices, often becoming pawns in a ransom scheme. During the agonizing wait for their release, these individuals endured torture, forced labor, and even death, while women were subjected to rape and forced into sexual slavery, sold to brothels or private clients. Tragically, child migrants also faced abuse and exploitation, with reports of incidents surfacing regularly. A disturbing video aired by CNN in November 2017 exposed a slave auction in Libya, shedding light on the pervasive nature of human trafficking in the country. The Asma Boys, a Libyan group, have a history of targeting migrants from other African regions, perpetuating violence and destruction. Nigerian migrants, among others, have recounted tales of horrific abuse in detention centers, including being leased or sold as slaves. Shocking footage emerged on social media, showing Sudanese migrants being subjected to brutal treatment for ransom demands. In response to such atrocities, the United Nations imposed sanctions on several individuals involved in orchestrating slave trade networks. Despite global efforts to eradicate slavery, some Arab countries have resisted acknowledging their role in perpetuating this heinous practice. Many African authors have refrained from documenting the Arab-Muslim slave trade, often out of religious solidarity or fear of repercussions. However, it is imperative to confront this dark chapter of history openly and honestly. The horrors endured by those ensnared in the Arab-Muslim slave trade echo through the ages, with modern-day migrants still facing exploitation and bondage. It is incumbent upon us to educate ourselves about this hidden past and advocate for change. By acknowledging and condemning slavery in all its forms, we uphold principles of justice, equality, and compassion. Together, we must strive to create a world where no one is subjected to the cruelty of slavery. By raising awareness, speaking out against injustice, and fostering empathy, we honor the resilience of those who have suffered and pave the way for a brighter, more equitable future for all.